So hey everybody, today what we're gonna talk using the power of Pardot's marketing automation with specifically HML, dynamic content, and snippets. So if you joined me earlier, I guess this year for Par Dreaming, so I know there's a couple of people here that did. Um, I gave a essentially like a very similar presentation on this. So what we wanted to do this time was wanted to kind of go through some of the basics, right, through this three features, and then provide you guys with like a real life scenario where like you would use all these things, and then I wanted to open up the conversation to see a how you're using it in your organizations, and then maybe other use cases that you've seen, heard about, read about, and let's just have a discussion on that. So here we go. Here we go. So we're just gonna go ahead and dive straight into it. Here's the quick agenda. So we have as you go about your adventures in marketing operations, you're probably setting up a bunch of different content and different campaigns. So specifically around the holidays, we're starting to work with like nonprofits and just other even B2C organizations that are starting to do a lot of promotions, a lot of fundraising campaigns, things like that. But still trying to deliver value to their constituents, their students, their B2B or B2C customers. And so one of the things that kind of like the scenario that we're going to take you through today is like, okay, so you already have a bunch of content. How can you like you repurpose some of that content and streamline your content delivery process using Pardot? So in one of the examples that we had, we essentially had this existing process. So for um, a lot of marketing operations professionals, it's not like this straightforward, but usually we use this kind of like as the dumbed down version to make sure that we can explain the process to our other stakeholders in sales, service, other people within the organization. And so this is generally, like I said, the process where you would go fill out a form. That form collects data, and then the person on the other end, right, the constituent, the student, the customer, ends up getting an email with a specific piece of content. So what we don't like, kind of like about this process, is that for some organizations, right, having one form for every single little thing works because they may only have like 10 pieces of content, right? But as you start getting into having either specific ads pushed to a specific page, or from different channels, or even just having a large library of things that you're trying to promote, right, towards the end of the year or throughout the year for nurturing purposes, it can get really heavy on marketing operations to have to set up a form every single time, new template, new everything, new campaign. And so what we wanted to do here was kind of guide you how you're able to use some of these different tools to help you streamline that process and hopefully save you some time. So it does require some setup, right, on your part, to do some of the things that we're going to discuss today, and we can go into depth in what those are. But essentially, I think we're on agreement that if we can streamline a process where I don't have to set up a form, an email template, a new campaign, and all this other assets each time, I think we would all like that. So that's what we're going through this presentation. So HML, HML is something that probably got turned any new account well over a year ago. And for any of the older accounts, if you haven't migrated over, you should. HML is essentially what comes after variable tags. Some people know them as tokens if you're kind of coming from Marketo. Mail merge values if you're like used to using like Excel or like the Adobe suite of products. So essentially what it is, it's a way for you to look at an individual person, and then you are able to pull data from that person's record and then apply it to somewhere in Pardot. So usually that's in an email, but you can also use it to personalize forms, um, and other content throughout the platform. So HML, right? So again, it looks at the data in the person's record and it just updates it. So it just shows it to you the way that it's displayed in the background in the data bits. So in this particular example, what we did was the person goes to a specific website. We have essentially made one form that manages all case studies or all specific downloadable pieces of content. And what we actually did is we worked with a WordPress developer to make a a series of fields that the customer can fill in WordPress to help set this process up. So instead of, teaching them how to do Pardot and then teaching them how to do WordPress. And then they also use Gravity Forms, right? So three different tools. They know how to do it individually, but we wanted to streamline it. So what we're doing is we're using one form. So it was set up once. You just end up dropping the form over and over again whenever they're building new pages. In Pardot, there is one email template that has some generic context and then uses this HML tokens to populate uh, specific values that are on the record. And then in WordPress, we have some fields where they would say, this is the title of the page that we're on, right? Well, there's going to be specific fields that are, you may or may not be able to see here on the screenshot, post object title and then link document. So when it comes to Pardot and you're trying to open up like a PDF, I've used these for if you're trying to generate like a document. So when you're making a donation and then you want to say, when you want to send the customer a thank you email with like an attachment so they can actually like download it and like print it out. And, sometimes for end of the year campaigns, you'll donate on behalf of somebody else, right? Somebody that maybe is deceased or a cause, something like that. And so you want to have this kind of like certificate, this receipt. We're able to use WordPress to essentially generate something like that and then attach it. And then when they get the email, they can click it. It opens up a PDF in a browser window because we know that Pardot doesn't do that. It makes you download it. And then they have the opportunity to, to download it directly from the browser. So that's one. And then you could, of course, also use this to, it only keeps the most recent form fills. So what that means is if they download three different pieces of content and you have this automation set up for all three of them, then after each form fill, they may get a similar looking email, right? But the text will be different for each time. So then dynamic content, right? So dynamic content, essentially what we have with this is we are making a decision. It's almost like an if and then statement. If this field equals this, then show this, right? So kind of like limitation with dynamic content is you're not able to use all your fields out of the box. So if you have like anything like on the custom object, or if you have things maybe on an opportunity object, the fields that you use have to be on a lead or contact object. So, and there's also, you can show like 50 variations in one block of dynamic content. But essentially what you would be able to do with this, and what we've done in the past with some of our nonprofit um, organizations, is usually nonprofits, like if they're been established for a couple of years, something that they'll do is they'll have tiered givers. So essentially what they'll do is they'll say, okay, this is like, a normal person on an annual basis may give us $100, right? That's kind of like one time, givers, which we're grateful for, but and there's volume there, but again, $100. versus people that do campaigns for annual giving. Like I'll say I'll give you $5,000 or $10,000 over the course of 2 years or 3 years, or grants or other stuff like that. So um, every organization kind of has their own numbers, and so something that you can do is leveraging Salesforce. Right, you can write a formula, write a process where if in any specific year, or a lot of people do year over year, they meet a specific threshold, then you could use Salesforce like a flow or a process builder, or even a formula to update what tier they're in. And then when they make a new donation, right, we can include HML in dynamic content and say, thank you for your contribution of, X, whatever you gave us. You have now reached, maybe you don't tell them what tier, but because, we care about you as a constituent, what we'll do is we'll show you different messaging, right? And so that's very popular. So what we've done for end of the year campaigns, right around now, or for like Giving Tuesday, the Tuesday after Cyber Monday, which is after Black Friday, after Thanksgiving, what we've done for those is we've used, have they ever given and they're in their database? Have they given in the last 2 years, in the last year, or have they given this year? And um, can we uh, tap them again to see if they'll be willing to give us, um, a gift again this holiday season? So again, using dynamic content in HML, you're showing what they already did, and dynamic content, you're able to display a completely different message based on data that you have on them, but you don't necessarily have to show them. And then finally, we have our snippets. So snippets are going to be, um, in my opinion, the lower end of the three. But snippets are important because it, again, putting it in a kind of like end of the year campaign um, initiative. If you have something like, um, some organizations have, like they'll do like in-person event at the end of the year, or they'll release a end of the year video or something like that, that's going to be used on landing pages, forums, websites, on emails. Snippets are a really good way of you having data that is going to be reusable across different assets. Now, snippets, before there were snippets, we used to just use dynamic content or copy and paste the text that we needed, right? So now that we have snippets, you're able to associate a snippet, which is just a block of static text, no images, no HML, with a Salesforce campaign or to one of your business units. So for those of you that are tuning in that have business units, snippets are a way that they interact with reports in Salesforce. You can manipulate them using flows, process builder. They're an object that comes with Salesforce, and you're able to update that either using Salesforce or Pardot functionality, and then we are able to use that and repurpose it across multiple emails in a specific campaign. So in the past, done when we've used all three of these, what we've done is use Engagement Studio to essentially build out different routes. And so again, we'll do it based on tiers or based on when they recently gave us, how much money they gave, or if you have multiple ads that you're using in this campaigns that you're putting together for end of the year, or Giving Tuesday, right, that recently passed, then you are able to customize those messages even further, right, depending on who you're talking to. So that's really where, although all these three features are great and you should use them on an ongoing basis on your nurture campaigns or end of the year campaigns, engagement zero is going to be really the system that is going to kind of like piece them all together. So in this particular scenario, what we ended up doing was, we were trying to consolidate a content library, And so what we ended up doing, like I mentioned earlier, was we ended up with one form, which was really a form handler using Gravity Forms, and then one email template. And so essentially, people fill it out. It still does the processing right on the website, just like it would do. It comes into Pardot. But because of that development that I was talking about earlier with WordPress, we're able to pass some additional hidden fields. And then when they come in, we're able to take specific actions based on those fields. And then lastly, we use our one template to then update it using dynamic content and HML. And based on those hidden fields, we're able to display the right piece of content, the right promotion, the right message to that person based on what they just did. Right. So it's a little bit more specific, more niche, and you can have as many combinations as you want. Um, Even with dynamic content, right? You have, I believe, it's like 26 different combinations, but you can always do another dynamic content block to like roll over. And so we wrote about that on the Spot for Pardot blog if you're interested in learning how to expand just using one dynamic content block. But yeah, that's essentially the process that we're talking about here. And of course, like the benefits of doing something like this where you're streamlining using your form handlers or your forms and hidden fields and all this other stuff is it sounds like you're doing a lot more work, but I have found that it's a little bit more um like less prone to errors because you're doing a lot of the work up front versus like trying to make sure that when you instead of like copying pasting or like duplicating a template and then forgetting to update tags and things like that. So especially for teams that are more nimble, right? This process of kind of customizing using one form, one email template across all of your templated forms or just a category of them could definitely help not only streamline your process and be more efficient, but also train maybe either yourself or somebody else that can help you in your department. So that's kind of those are a couple of the benefits that I would say are using HML dynamic content snippets to personalize and really take it to the kind of like the next step. Oops. Here's an example of one template that we put together. And so on the top, we have the logo. Thank you for downloading. We can swap out this header using dynamic content, right? And we can display different things. So if you wanted to create like a new banner image for everything, or you wanted to create a banner image for certain categories, case studies, ebooks, whatever, we can swap those out. And then here in the email, we're using HML dynamic content to essentially display uh, different different links, different text, things like that. And then I ended up just like coding in the using HML the link to the button. So the button's static. It will change the text and the URL based on what's submitted up here, right? And then on the bottom, we're just using snippets. But you can also use dynamic content to personalize that and keep it consistent with your other emails that you have on your other campaigns. Ultimately, I guess the goal is working smarter, not harder, right? And so making sure that you are using blocks, right? You're using things instead of like copy and pasting or just duplicating a bunch of different templates. The goal here is, although those are viable solutions, the goal here is to make sure like, hey, can I just create something brand new and just drag and drop, so to speak. This right here, this design, we're not using the new email lightning builder yet. I haven't. I know dynamic content does work. I know HML works, and I know snippets work. I just haven't used the new lightning experience to build an email using all of this. So at this point, I wouldn't know if that works or not. But the the classic, I guess, email builder, this is very straightforward. And this is what most of us have been using for the last couple of years. Does anybody have any questions or input at this point?
I would ask, so then what is your tracking like with any of it? So you're not sending them to individual asset campaigns in Salesforce or tracking, the email information specific to the asset they downloaded. Um, just kind of where's your tracking level once you consolidated this and made it an easier process?
Yeah.
Outside.
So what we ended up doing, that's a great question. So what we ended up doing is we we went through kind of like this is with this particular client, right? We went through the discovery phase here, and we were talking about like all these different things. We also talked about like, should we use dynamic content and just have um, different like custom redirects, right, with the right asset, so then we're able to track all these different things and whatnot. At the end of the day, this particular client was like, that sounds like a lot more work than what we're doing right now, and um, they care about two things. They want to make sure that leads, or sorry, people that are interested are not having a hard time filling out their forms. So their forms are not, they're very for downloadable things like this, they're very like open, so they're not asking for a lot of very niche specific information that I know some other organizations require as part of their like lead management process, right? So in terms of how are we tracking them, so since we are using one template, right, it's all kind of tied to one campaign, so it just keeps growing and growing and growing. And I know for some people that's not great. What we're doing and where we cared about a little bit more was um, we build a dashboard that talks about like the different um, as they come in, right, these fields are being updated. So we have a monthly kind of like dashboard to show us what's being consumed at any given time, with the understanding that it's being overridden, right? So it is showing us just like what's the most recent thing. With their customers, it seems like it's usually one or two links and downloads, and that's kind of what the activity would be for a month anyway. So it works fine. The second thing that we do is we do have an automation rule essentially for every case study to add them to a campaign as a campaign member. So that's how we decided to track, and that was easy enough for them to clone and leverage. But I understand that some people may want a lot more analytics based on the case study and things like that, but they just care how consumption, and so we're giving that with the dashboard. And then for historical kind of campaign influence stuff, where we are adding them with an automation rule to the specific child campaign with like a status of like clicked that's also responded and things like that. So probably work for what you're trying to do, Michelle, right? You guys are a lot more analytical in that sense.
Yeah, a little
Yeah,
bit. But it is interesting to kind of hear, and of course, needs are different here
yeah.
and
Hey, Marianne. Hey, Jacqueline. Hey, Patricia. Do you guys have any questions so far? Okay, I see. What's your planning process for an email look like? Do you have a prep doc you use? Is there a decision tree for HML, dynamic content, or snippets? So let's see. Let me start with that. So for the email for this particular process, the customer came to us like with a couple of examples. They wanted something really simple. We did discuss having like as a phase two, we discussed content in between the footer and the button, because they're this year for them was like a year of building content, right? So what they're starting to do now, kind of like in the last quarter of the year, is they're starting to do multiple series, right? So there where it's like part one out of three, part two out of three, part three out of three. So on some of those campaigns that they're creating very specific segments for, what they want to do is they want to do something like Amazon would do, like because you bought this, right? Like you could try this and this. So we're in the planning stages for that to add a component down here. But in terms of what you're seeing on the screen and the planning process around that, they had a very specific example of what they wanted, and so we just went with that. Um, so I don't for this one I don't think I have a prep doc, and is there a decision tree to onto what to use. So I wrote about all three of these in one of the blog. um I They are an advanced customer, right, in terms of their Pardot tier. So for them, they had access to all three of these, right? And plus edition customers would do too. Growth edition customers would only have access to HML and snippets. I don't know if you can buy the dynamic content add-on, but most customers that are in growth are probably not going to do that, from my experience. So um, we were using dynamic content originally because that's kind of like where we were at. But then as in the last year they've started scaling up a lot more. We decided to embark on this journey and say, okay, dynamic content is not like it made sense, well over a year ago to do that. It doesn't make sense with the amount of content that you're aiming to produce in the next couple of quarters. So that's why we ended up switching to this process, right? To make sure that it was easier for them to maintain having a small team in the marketing department.
Thanks, Marcus. How are you documenting the process behind each one? Like dynamic content always kind of drives me crazy because it's so hard to get to. It's hard to show to people. So if you're handing off a process, it can be really frustrating. So of course, I have a spreadsheet and I have each of the cells. Um, how are you doing that?
Yeah, so for this particular process, we actually put a deck together to walk them through the process because they're this particular customer, it's they have grown a lot with us, right? And but they're still small. So to your point, we needed to have something that was like visual and easy to understand, just in case somebody needed to like join and set up something really quickly when the main point of contact wasn't available. So we did put together a deck in terms of the dynamic content. Right now, we're just using about four different pieces of dynamic content, and like they each have like five variations. So it's very small right now in terms of the email design on that banner on the top. They're doing categories, so we're not personalizing right at this moment. If they download case study XYZ, it won't show the specific like case study, book on the left and the title on the right at this point. um they just haven't one they don't have enough bandwidth to make something like that and keep up with it. But yeah, that's the level of for this one of what we've documented. I know for other projects that we had that use a bunch of dynamic content, Excel has been unfortunately the only way to track it. I know we've leaned on our teammate Cruiser to pull in some of this using the API, but it still has been very Excel um, driven organization, unfortunately. That's a great question.
Something to refresh me on with this, since you're combining all three custom asset types, are they all able to be used within each other? I haven't really used snippets as much myself, but For example, I have some dynamic content that has HTML in it. Are they all able to intertwine that way?
Yeah, so you are able to put um you are not able to put dynamic content in snippets. You are able to put HML in snippets, but when you go build a snippet, you do not see the option to enable HML. So it just looks like a plain editor where you're just typing things, making some things maybe bold and linking things, but there's not images, there's not anything for like actual code in snippets. So yeah, so HML I think fits in with everything, even though you can't see it in snippets. I have tested it and it works. So
Mhm.
I can tell you that much. For dynamic content, I know dynamic content and snippets don't mix, because dynamic, I think is really weird because snippets are always going to be the same, right? Regardless, because it's just static text. But since it doesn't like code,
Okay.
I think that's the reason why it doesn't take dynamic content. I have tried to use snippets and dynamic content specifically, trying to, when it first came out, it said that you can use it for images, for links, for text, and I was like, okay, cool, let's do this. I tried all the possible combinations that I could imagine, of displaying an image within a snippet. So I went really old school where we just had like the brackets that say IMG, right, for image. I did that. I did the proper HTML way of like displaying an image, tried different things, and then was testing it to display it, and it just wouldn't. It would just show like the plain text as it was. So um, I think I tried enough different variations to say like it's just not gonna display an image, and it doesn't take HTML. So in the documentation it says like dynamic content snippets just don't mix.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And then also with that, do you ever see issues? So I'm not using Lightning Builder yet for email, but so currently I'm always checking my HTML and text versions of the email. Do you see any issues in text versions with any of the three of these?
No, they've been very like useful, like very reliable in that sense. The one thing that I will mention is if you're like an identity user, right? Which right now we're kind of like in that limbo land. If you're in a big organization that you have a lot of people, and fortunately your marketing team may not have a license. Snippets, like their origin is Salesforce. Because of that, if you don't have somebody that is going to be able to create them for you, just like they would probably create campaigns for you, that's a blocker.
Mm,
I don't suspect that that would be. I suspect for most organizations that's not the case anymore, as it was maybe 2 3 years ago. That marketing didn't have access to Salesforce, but you do have to set them up there, and you have to assign them either to a campaign or to a business unit before you can see it in Pardot. So if you're in running on pi.pardot.com, and that's all you have access to, you will not be able to create snippets. You need somebody on the Salesforce site to do it for you. I believe you also need to have connected campaigns enabled. Otherwise, they won't like come over. And in Classic, you will, once you enable HML, you the little pop up changes just a little bit, and it has tabs on the left side, and you'll see a new tab for snippet.
mm,
So the other thing that I'll mention on this, and Marianne, I mean, she's like trailblazer here that talked about these in 2020 at Part Dreaming. Um, Sometimes they take a couple of minutes to sync over. So if you remember the frustrations with connected campaigns, of sometimes you create them and your way is the same
mm,
kind of like little thing. So what I like to do is I like to I like to just make sure that they're linked to the business unit, and I just kind of, that way there's no visibility type like issues. But I would say if you're working with a team of people in marketing who are, globally kind of like broken down, and you kind of have your folders and they have their folders, then I think that the if you're not using business units, then you would want to go the route for attaching it to a campaign, so that way you can manage your campaigns and they can manage theirs, and there's no mix. But generally speaking, my customers like to keep things open, that anybody can use them who has access to Pardot, and so that's what I've that's been my experience.
Okay.
Marianne, do you have anything to add there in terms of any hiccups that you've noticed with snippets? And I know you take it a lot further than I have with flows and other stuffs, but what have you seen anything weird with it not rendering correctly, or not being able to pull specific values into a snippet?
I hadn't had that trouble. Really, my biggest issue was we're using high volume because we had so many associated with each event. Had about 38 snippets with each event. So the big thing was the refreshing process and managing the flow that populated it. Because yeah, our use case is it's all about product data, or not product data, business data being used in Pardot, because we well, frankly, I was frustrated with the rekeying data that existed somewhere else and keeping it consistent, because proof an email and then find out 5 minutes after you scheduled it that um, some detail had changed, and you had to bring it back, edit it, all that, and it was happening a lot. And so we were pretty desperate for this. So when it came along, we were pretty far ahead of the curve in terms of development. At the time, Salesforce wasn't actually sure if we could edit the snippet object in a flow. Like, hold my beer. And so we did. Luckily, I had an awesome admin that he loved to hack, and he's like, "I bet we can do it. Give me a minute." And I mean, it was about a half an hour. He called me back. He's like, "Got it. Let's do it." Um,
Yeah.
so
I
yeah,
will
we took it
say
a
that
little far.
I learned about that from you and your presentation. So whenever I've had customers say, can like we do something else with it?" I'm like, "Yeah, there's a recording from Marianne on Par Dreaming. Go watch it, and then if you have questions, let me know, and we'll ask her." So
And I just say make really good friends with a flow master, because
yeah.
they can make things happen that you can't even imagine. Um, but I'm here because I'm a little out of sync. I haven't touched snippets in about a year, so I'm like, I would like to see if there was anything I missed. It was pretty consistent with where the last time I looked it was.
Yeah.
But
The last time I touched them was right before Par Dreaming, so it has been a month or a little bit over,
yeah.
but not much has changed. I don't know if that's like good or bad. I know they focus a lot more of their attention to beefing up like the Lightning experiences for email and for landing pages, but I personally haven't had too much time to give to those two tools. Like I think I'm waiting for it to be like 1-to-1 with Classic. I like being in the code similar to Michelle, and I don't know if you enjoy Michelle, but I do. So like being doing the drag and drop feels very uh, for me personally, it feels very anticlimactic. At this stage, I feel like it should be a lot better, but it comes in waves, and so we'll take what we get, and we'll do the best that we can with what we have. So let's see. I think I
I have
have.
I
Go
have
ahead.
one other question on
Yeah.
dynamic content, and it's something I just ran into today that I don't know how I haven't before. I think it's because this wasn't technically. I don't know why. I might need to look with Salesforce admins why we set it up this way, but the field is a text field in Pardot, but we were using it in dynamic content as if it was a drop down where, because in forms, if we offer it, we offer certain values as a drop down. So you hope most of them are filled out that way, but we were finding in testing issues if it was blank. I know null is always a hard thing between both systems, Salesforce and Pardot sometimes, and syncability, but also it was affecting dynamic content, displaying nothing. It wouldn't even go back to the default content that we had in the dynamic content. So it was a weird issue. And I was just going to see if you had run across, because I saw things when I was researching around of, make sure it's a drop down and has a value. Even if that value is null, then null in a form is going to still force you, if it's a required field in the form, actually put a value and not the blank one. It was a funky thing with that. And I'm curious if you've ever come across with dynamic content where the default wouldn't even load because of like a blank value.
I personally have not seen that, but I've also not been in the situation where like it's either a drop down or it isn't.
Yeah, yeah.
so
I think that
so
was
I
causing.
think with those, it, yeah, that's interesting. Hmm. Is it just like a regular pick list, Michelle, or is it like a multi-select?
Like regular when we're putting it
Regular,
in a form. So even though it's a text field, we're making it just a drop down in a
right,
form so that they should have specific values in it.
right.
Again, I might just need to assess we convert it to a drop down field as a whole, and that'll solve the dynamic content anyway. Just
Yeah,
curious.
because for me, like when we're trying to do kind of like what you mentioned, I'll keep the whole pick list and then I'll just like hide the specific values that I don't want. But God, if you have like over anything over like I feel like 15, it just sucks. It
Mhm.
sucks to have to delete them every single time and like it's not very fun.
Yeah.
So I totally get why you would have done something. No, I haven't run into that. Laura, do you have any like expertise in that area?
No, sorry, nothing to add.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm
Yeah,
on pet
Michelle.
wrangling watch, so
Oh, you're good. Yeah. Sorry, Michelle. No.
No, go ahead.
Dice.
You can continue.
Okay. All right. I think I don't have a lot more slides. Let me keep going here. Um so some of this Marianne kind of like beat me to the punch, but you do need to have HML enabled, and we wrote a blog about it. It's not really hard and it doesn't really impact um your emails or anywhere you're using it. Though there is a couple of things to keep in mind when you're enabling HML. Uh, anything that is, if you're a brand new customer, HML is probably already enabled, right? And I would say brand new customer, a year older or younger. So you don't have to deal with it. It's just what you as you come in, it's been there. For anybody that has been using that, maybe concerned about like, hey, we're using a lot of variable tags and like legacy campaigns and things like that. What do we do? I would say end of the year is a perfect time to evaluate and see what you need to update and what you need to get rid of and what you need to build for next year. But when you enable HML, we wrote a blog about it, of course, and so the steps are really straightforward. It doesn't affect any legacy stuff. It only affects it if you go in and edit it, and then you try to save it. Then it'll tell you, hey, you need to change this. When that happens, one thing to keep in mind is that from variable tags to HML, there's very few, but there is a handful of tokens that don't come over or they come over a little bit different. So you just want to make sure that you, if you convert an existing email template and you're converting it, that you're just you like run another test through it and just make sure that everything's working how you're expecting it to be. But it should be pretty much 100% the same, especially for common fields like name, company, first name, last name, any custom fields that you've been using, things like that. Dynamic content is the only option that I described that is not available to all customers. You do have to be Plus, Advanced, or the highest one to have it. Growth, right? Edition customers do not have access to dynamic content, but they do have access to the other ones. Connected campaigns, I believe now at this point, like probably if you are a customer from the last 2 years moving forward, connected campaign has been enabled by default. If you're a legacy customer, you haven't enabled this, you're missing out on a lot of stuff. So you should probably look into that. And then for troubleshooting, just a couple of things to keep in mind from some of the lessons that we learned were there's tools for dynamic content that obviously you can use for testing to make sure that you're displaying the right values. Snippets can sometimes take a couple of minutes to sync over, so just be patient. And normally you're not building the campaign and sending it out right away. Normally there's at least a couple of hours, if not half a day or two, before before you start building to getting it approved and then sending it out. But just something to keep in mind. And then form handlers. This is kind of like general, but not having really to do with HML or anything we talked about today. But form handlers can be a little bit tricky if you're not used to setting this up. You want to make sure that you're testing incognito and as a cookie prospect to just make sure that you're getting the expected behavior from the way that the data is coming into your system. So then you feel comfortable and confident that it's actually displaying the right information. And then for blanks, right? So this is going to be blanks specifically for HML. So in the past, you have variable tags, let's say Marcos, right? Marcos goes to the website. I'm an anonymous visitor. I fill out a form to sign into your newsletter, right? Because those are amazing and everybody loves them, right? But usually you ask for an email address and that's it. So you have my email address, you can email me, but then in your email campaign, you say dear or hi or hey or Marcos, right? But you don't have that information. So then you have a blank. Historically, we've been able to use a default value for those under the prospect field sync. There's a field that you can fill in and say, if Marcos doesn't have a name, then put friend or colleague or customer, whatever you want. What we are able to do now with HML is you're able to customize that message a lot more. And so for you still probably want to use some what would you say, some different some basic like greetings, like customer or whatever, but you are able to make decisions based on if there's specific like values in that field or if it's blank. You can do a blanket statement, and you could also switch those greetings up per email. So instead of having a global default, you can have a default per template, which is really cool because some nurtures maybe for customers, some of them maybe for leads and prospects, and then some of them could be for other types of information. So just know that you do have the ability to customize those greetings, or really any piece of content in the email using HML instead of using global defaults. So here are just some resources that I wrote down. I'll go ahead and share the slides, and we'll also have it recorded. But the majority of these are either help articles, or you should be able to get them to them pretty easily with just by googling kind of like the words. But these are some of the ones that I pulled. I wrote a couple of them, but then there's also several that are from our community that I used for this presentation. And that's kind of it. Let's see.
Thanks, Marcos.
Yeah. let's see. Just a few of us now. I see. Is there let's see. Marianne, is there anything else interesting that you want to share about snippets? Our queen of snippets here.
Probably my favorite thing is that you can use a standard Salesforce report to report on them. So the visibility is very useful. Also, I mean, if you have a Pardot team that is pretty conversant in Salesforce, they can adapt pretty quickly. I've found dynamic content, while I like it, it's a little harder to teach somebody to master it, to give them confidence in it, because you have to think, like, you almost have to imagine the data because you can't see it because it's the way the interface is set up. So I'm always, I'm like with a whiteboard, or,
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times I've like pulled up something and just like scribbled to say, like, imagine it's like a slot machine and the wheels are turning, and this is option A and this is option B. So
Yeah.
I always struggle to help somebody kind of grasp that. Whereas when you show them snippets, especially because I can program it, I can build it through Flow, it's so tangible that people, grasp it. So that, I love that, but because it often requires Salesforce skill, there's limitations there. I just happen to have had a really good partnership.
Yeah. And then you have to, then the other side of that is, depending on the organization you're working with, that may require approval and,
Mm-hmm.
go through your normal sandboxes. If, normal, I mean, I feel like a snippet, you probably would be okay with going like from like a partial to production, or even building and production. Cause it really, I mean, depending on the policies of the organization, but I feel it's not like, you're not really configuring anything.
No, it just, I'm finding, so I'm really working with my first org where there's a pretty deep reliance on sandboxes,
Yeah.
and trying to implement Pardot and kind of keep going, but it's just Pardot, guys. Like, it's okay. Like, it's your little pet in the corner. Like, marketing can handle this. Like, it's okay. When they have a big idea that they want to execute, then we'll get into how much chaos it can create. But I have a meeting next week on a deep dive on the Pardot sandbox.
Oh,
But
that's
it's
gonna
like
be fun.
Pardot sandbox for IT. And I
Not
keep
a
trying to say
sandbox.
it's the same word, but it doesn't mean the same thing.
Yeah, that's always a fun one to have.
It's my first time doing it, so we'll see how I do. But that's, I guess that to me is one of the big differences, is that I like the kind of concrete data aspect of snippets. And so it really connects to me as somebody who did mail merges for the first many, many years of my life. But I like dynamic content because you can keep it on your own island. You keep it within the marketing team, and it's just their world, and that is handy as well. You don't have to explain it to outside forces. So
Yeah.
there are
And
trade-offs.
you brought up a good point, kind of like that decision tree. Like, for this particular client, like, they have a Salesforce team and they're pretty good. But it's just like, it's like two or three of them that get hit with any like request Salesforce across the business, right? Compared to, it may be just one or two marketing people, but like they can manage it in Pardot and not have to worry about asking anybody,
Mm-hmm.
right? So totally feel, that sentiment about like, it depends on the organization. It depends. Do you have the partnership, right, Marianne, of like somebody that you trust to do it, or to work with you to get it done? But yeah, not everybody has that, and that's okay. There's ways that we can make sure that we're managing this so we're successful. So that's great.
The other element on snippets is if somebody else can manage the data. So that's the other advantage of them. And again, I'm not saying they're better than anything else. That's my little baby. But I like that if it's data that somebody else manages, you can keep the responsibility on their shoulders and inherit their data, as opposed to having to copy it, interpret it, almost anything else. You could say, hey, if the date's wrong in the Salesforce, then it's exactly. Because we used to have a process that was like this Google Doc that 13 people had to update every time a date changed. And you had to sign off that all 13 people had updated it. Well, that was fine when we changed one a year. We got up to 140 events and we were changing probably 60 of them throughout the flow. And sometimes, 30 days before the event, when marketing started 60 days before the event. So it got crazy. So Snippets kind of saved our bacon on that whole process. So again, I waited for it. It finally got here. I love it.
I was on mute. I was going to say you can also report on who last edited it in
Not
Salesforce.
me.
Yeah, so that's good.
I didn't do it.
Yeah, I have to jump because I have another call at this point. But I'll leave you, Michelle and Laura, to see if you guys want to keep chatting. But it was great seeing all of you. So thank you, Marianne, for all your input, and Michelle for all your great questions. Everybody else as well. If you guys have any other ones on Snippets, reach out to Marianne first on Trailblazer community. If you have
Nice.
anything on HML and dynamic content, you can reach out to me also on the Productions channel. So we'll see you soon.
Thank you, Marcos.
Thank you.
And we did record, so we're going to send this out real soon here.
And we can get that link to the slides as well.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you very much. You guys have a
Thank
good
you,
rest of your
everyone.
night. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Good to see you guys.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Sorry, I've got dog tippy taps over here ready to go. All right, I don't think we have any. I don't think we have any January announcements. So I think we're, just stay tuned. We'll figure something out for January. We'll catch you guys in the new year.
Yes.
Happy New Year.
Have a good one. Bye.